The Saurian extremist's plasma bolt seared through 8-year-old Lily's skull, exploding her head like an overripe melon as her lifeless body crumpled to the embassy floor in a growing pool of blood and brain matter. Former Navy SEAL Russell Green skidded to a halt, his fingers clawing helplessly at Lily's still-warm corpse, while the Saurian assassins faded into the shadows. He gathered the headless child in his arms, his anguished scream echoing through the compound. They had come in the night, 12 reptilian terrorists armed with plasma rifles and cloaking tech, bypassing security systems with ruthless precision to storm the human enclave. Russell, assigned to guard the ambassador and his family as part of the tenuous human-Saurian peace accords, had been on watch when the attack began. Alarms blared and plasma fire lit up the compound as the extremists went room to room, slaughtering any humans they found. Little Lily had been separated from her parents in the chaos, stumbling alone into a darkened hallway. Terrorist leader Zephyr emerged from the shadows before her like a demon, his eyes blazing with xenophobic hatred. The helpless girl could only whimper as the towering Saurian aimed his rifle at her head and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Her execution was meant to send a message to the human scum infesting his world. By the time Russell reached her, Lily was already gone, her innocent spirit snuffed out by Saurian savagery. He cradled her ruined body, tears streaming down his face, the knowledge that he'd failed to protect her like a knife in his heart. But his grief quickly turned to white-hot rage. This act of brutality would not go unanswered. Zephyr and his band of murderers would pay. As the sun rose over the smoking ruins of the embassy, the truth became clear. The Saurians wanted humanity gone from Zephyria, and they were willing to kill innocent children to make it happen. If humanity didn't act decisively, every human on the planet would soon end up like little Lily, a lifeless corpse rotting in alien soil. There would be no mercy and no more negotiations, Russell vowed as he stood over the mangled remains of the little girl he'd sworn to protect. The reptilian scum had sealed their own fate. The Saurian Empire had killed a human child in cold blood, and now the humans would make them run. Russell's hands shook with rage as he carried Lily's broken body out of the embassy, her blood staining his uniform. Ambassador Carter and his wife Sarah wept openly, collapsing to their knees at the sight of their daughter. The other security personnel, Mike Thompson, David Lee, and James Miller, stood guard with weapons drawn, scanning for any further threats. "We need to secure the compound," Russell said, his voice hoarse. He gently laid Lily's body on a stretcher, covering her with a sheet. "Mike, David, set up a perimeter. James, get on the comms and update Earth Command on the situation." As the men scrambled to follow his orders, Russell pulled Ambassador Carter aside. "John, I'm so sorry," he said, gripping the man's shoulder. "I swear to you I will find the bastards who did this and make them pay." Carter nodded, his eyes hollow with grief. "I'll contact the UEG, demand they take action. This cannot stand." Russell spent the next several hours gathering intel on the SLF, reaching out to his network of contacts within the Saurian government and military. What he learned chilled him to the bone. The SLF was no ragtag band of extremists. They were a highly organized, well-funded terrorist group with a singular goal: to purge all non-Saurians from Zephyria and establish Saurian dominance across the galaxy. They had infiltrated every level of Saurian society, from the lowest ranks of the military to the highest echelons of government. A message from Earth Command interrupted his investigations. "Orders from the UEG, sir," James said, handing Russell a tablet. "They want us to evacuate immediately. They say they can't risk another war with the Saurians." Russell read the orders, his jaw clenched. Evacuate? Abandon Zephyria and let Lily's killers go free? Not a chance in hell. He crushed the tablet in his fist, the plastic cracking. "We're not going anywhere," he growled. "Mike, David, James, you're with me. We're going to track down Zephyr and the SLF and bring them to justice. UEG be damned. You in?" The three men exchanged glances, then nodded. They knew the risks, but they also knew they couldn't let Lily's death go unavenged. As they gathered their gear and prepared to head out, a young Saurian male approached the compound, his hands raised in surrender. "I am Kazarak," he said, his voice trembling. "I have information about the SLF. I want to help you stop them." Russell aimed his rifle at the Saurian's head, his finger on the trigger. After what had happened to Lily, he wasn't about to trust any Saurian, especially one who claimed to have inside knowledge of the terrorists who had killed her. But as he looked into Kazarak's eyes, he saw genuine fear and revulsion there. This was no SLF plant or double agent. This was a man who had seen the evil his own people were capable of and wanted to make it right. "Talk," Russell said, lowering his weapon. "But if you're lying to me, I'll put a bullet in your skull myself." Kazarak swallowed hard and began to speak, revealing the location of a secret SLF base deep in the Zephyrian jungle. It was there, he said, that they would find Zephyr and his top lieutenants, planning their next attack on the humans. As Russell listened, a plan began to form in his mind. It was risky as hell, but it was the only way to get justice for Lily and ensure the safety of every human on Zephyria. With Kazarak's help, they would infiltrate the SLF base and take out Zephyr and his leadership, cutting the head off the snake before it could strike again. But even as they set out into the jungle, Russell knew that their mission was only the beginning. The SLF's influence ran deep, and there would be others to take Zephyr's place. And with the UEG unwilling to take a stand, it would fall to him and his team to protect humanity's interests on Zephyria, no matter the cost. They were entering a dangerous game, one where the stakes were nothing less than the fate of two species. But Russell was ready to play. For Lily, for the Carters, for every human on this godforsaken planet, he would see this through to the end. The hunt for Zephyr had begun. The hunt for Zephyr had begun. Acting on the intelligence provided by Kazarak, Russell and his team planned a daring raid on an SLF safe house located in the seedy underbelly of Zephyrria's capital city, Serapolis. The safe house, disguised as an abandoned warehouse, was believed to be a key meeting point for Zephyr and his top lieutenants. As the team approached the warehouse, they were suddenly ambushed by a group of 15 heavily armed SLF operatives led by one of Zephyr's most trusted commanders, a battle-hardened Saurian named Vorzak. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as Russell and his men dove for cover behind rusted-out shipping containers. The SLF had the high ground, raining down suppressing fire from the warehouse roof and upper windows. "Flank left," Russell barked to Mike and James over the din of battle. "I'll draw their fire." He popped out from cover, spraying the windows with his M41A pulse rifle, sending the SLF ducking back inside. Mike and James scurried along a side alley, preparing to storm the building from the rear. A fierce firefight ensued, with Russell and his team using their advanced human weaponry and tactics to hold off the Saurian attackers. Vorzak snarled orders to his troops in the Saurian tongue, directing their fire to keep the humans pinned down. During the chaos of the battle, Kazarak managed to slip away unnoticed and infiltrate the warehouse, determined to gather any valuable information on the SLF's plans and Zephyr's whereabouts. His heart pounded as he crept through darkened hallways, plasma rifle at the ready. Inside the warehouse, Kazarak discovered a trove of encrypted data files and hastily began downloading them onto a portable storage device. His fingers flew over the alien keyboard, praying that the files contained the information they so desperately needed. Just as he finished the download, he was confronted by Zephyr himself, who had been monitoring the situation remotely. The terrorist leader materialized out of the shadows, his eyes burning with rage. "Traitor," Zephyr hissed, recognizing Kazarak. "You dare betray your own kind for these hairless apes?" Kazarak raised his rifle, but Zephyr was too fast. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, swatting the weapon away and slamming a fist into Kazarak's jaw. The two Saurians engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand combat, smashing through crates and equipment. Kazarak fought valiantly, but he was outmatched by Zephyr's superior strength and skill. A punch to the gut doubled him over, and a knee to the face sent him crashing to the floor, green blood splattering the concrete. In moments, he was overpowered and left severely wounded, barely clinging to consciousness. Outside, Russell and his team managed to neutralize the remaining SLF operatives, but not without casualties. David Lee caught a plasma bolt to the chest and crumpled to the ground, dead before he hit the dirt. James Miller took a shot to the shoulder, crying out in pain as he fell back behind cover. As the smoke cleared, Russell realized that Kazarak was missing and rushed into the warehouse to find him. He arrived just in time to see Zephyr standing over Kazarak's beaten body, preparing to deliver the killing blow with a plasma knife. "Zephyr!" Russell roared, leveling his rifle. "Step away from him, you son of a bitch!" Zephyr turned, a cruel smile on his reptilian face. "Ah, the avenging angel arrives," he sneered. "How did it feel to cradle little Lily's corpse in your arms, monkey? To fail so utterly in your duty?" Russell saw red. He lunged forward, firing his rifle. But Zephyr was no longer there. The Saurian moved with impossible speed, dodging the shots and closing in on Russell. The two warriors collided, rifle and knife clattering to the floor as they grappled with each other, trading blows in a fierce battle. They seemed evenly matched, Russell's human fury and training against Zephyr's Saurian savagery and cunning. Russell headbutted the reptile, feeling the satisfying crunch of cartilage. But Zephyr only laughed, lashing out with his claws and opening bloody furrows across Russell's face. As they fought, Zephyr continued to taunt Russell about Lily's death, describing in graphic detail how it felt to vaporize her head, how her brain matter splashed on the embassy walls. Russell's rage and determination swelled like a firestorm in his veins, giving him strength. In a desperate move, Russell managed to sweep Zephyr's legs and take him down, pinning the Saurian to the ground. He wrapped his hands around Zephyr's throat, squeezing with all his might, watching the terrorist's eyes bulge behind his eyelids. Zephyr thrashed and bucked, clawing at Russell's arms, but the human's grip was iron. Yet even as he felt Zephyr start to weaken, Russell hesitated. He thought of Lily, of his duty and his honor. He was a soldier, not an executioner. He wanted justice for Lily, not revenge. Could he live with himself if he murdered a helpless foe, no matter how vile? That split second of hesitation was all Zephyr needed. The Saurian's claws found a hidden teleportation device on his belt. "Until next time, monkey," Zephyr rasped. There was a blinding flash, a wrenching sensation, and the terrorist was gone, leaving Russell clutching empty air. Exhausted and bloody, Russell staggered to his feet. He rushed to Kazarak's side, cradling the wounded Saurian. "Hang on, buddy, I got you," he said, putting pressure on the worst of the bleeding. Kazarak groaned, his eyes fluttering open. With a trembling hand, he pressed the portable storage device into Russell's palm. "Data. Downloaded," Kazarak whispered. "Zephyr's plans, communications, finances, it's all there." His eyes rolled back and he went limp, unconscious but still alive. "Mike, James, get him out of here," Russell ordered, handing Kazarak off to his teammates. "Back to the safe house for medical treatment. I'll cover you." The men complied, hefting Kazarak between them and making for the exit. Russell took a moment to retrieve his rifle and check on David Lee, closing the man's staring eyes and murmuring a silent prayer. Then he was moving, taking up the rear guard as they extracted from the warehouse, leaving only the bodies of their fallen foes behind. As they sped away into the neon-soaked night of Serapolis, Russell turned the data storage device over in his hands. Encrypted SLF files. It was a major blow to Zephyr's organization and a valuable lead in their hunt. But Russell knew their mission was far from over. They had hurt the SLF today, but not broken it. Zephyr was still out there, and he would be hungry for vengeance. The road ahead would be long and hard, with no guarantee of success or survival. But as Russell thought of Lily's smiling face, her laughter forever silenced by Saurian hate, he knew he could not rest until Zephyr and his SLF fanatics were brought to justice or put in the ground. For her sake, for the sake of every human on Zephyria, failure was not an option. With Kazarak's life hanging by a thread, Russell and his remaining team members raced through the neon-soaked streets of Serapolis, desperate to find help. Mike Thompson drove the armored transport with white-knuckled intensity, weaving through the chaotic traffic as James Miller monitored Kazarak's vital signs in the back. "He's fading fast," James said grimly, applying pressure to the Saurian's wounds. We need to find that doctor now. Russell nodded, his jaw set as he scanned the city's holographic map. Take a left up ahead, he ordered Mike. Zortak's clinic should be just around the corner. They screeched to a halt outside a nondescript building in a seedy part of town. Russell leapt out, pulse rifle at the ready, and pounded on the door. A moment later, it cracked open, revealing a wary reptilian face. What do you want, human? The Saurian hissed. Russell held up his hands. We need your help, Zortak. We have a wounded Saurian, and you're his only hope. Zortak's eyes narrowed. And why should I help you after what your kind has done to my people? Russell met the doctor's gaze unflinchingly. Because we have something you want. The encrypted SLF data files from the safe house raid. Help us, and they're yours. Zortak hesitated, then pushed the door open. Bring him inside quickly. The team carried Kazarak into the dimly lit clinic, laying him on an examination table. Zortak set to work immediately, his clawed hands a blur as he cleaned and sutured the Saurian's wounds, injecting him with a cocktail of alien drugs. For hours, Russell and his men waited anxiously, watching as Zortak fought to save Kazarak's life. Finally, the doctor stepped back, wiping his brow. He will live, Zortak said gruffly, but he needs rest. You can stay here while he recovers. As Kazarak slept, Russell and his team huddled around a terminal, working feverishly to decrypt the stolen data files. Days passed in a haze of caffeine and code breaking, their eyes bloodshot from staring at the screens. At last a chime sounded. We're in, Mike said triumphantly as the files began to spill their secrets. But as they delved deeper, their elation turned to horror. The SLF's tentacles reached far higher than they had ever imagined, coiled around the very heart of the Saurian government. And at the center of the web sat Zephyr, pulling the strings like a malevolent puppet master. Jesus, James breathed. How are we supposed to fight this? Russell's eyes hardened as he studied the map of the secret SLF base, hidden deep in the treacherous southern jungles. We take out the head of the snake, he said grimly. We find Zephyr, and we end this, once and for all. But even as he said the words, Russell knew that he and his battered team couldn't do it alone. They needed help, and there was only one man he trusted to provide it. With a deep breath, Russell activated the long-range communicator. Colonel Hawkins, he said formally, this is Russell Green. I need your help. There was a crackle of static, then a gruff voice responded. Green? What the hell are you doing on this channel? Russell quickly outlined the situation, the SLF's infiltration, Zephyr's hidden base. There was a long pause. God damn it, Green, Hawkins growled. You sure know how to pick your fights. All right, I'm in. I'll round up a team of my best men and meet you at the coordinates you specified. But you better be right about this. Relief washed over Russell. Thank you, sir. I'll see you planetside. As the call ended, Russell turned to his team, his eyes blazing with renewed determination. Gear up, he ordered. We've got a war to win. But even as they prepared for the mission, an urgent message pinged on Russell's communicator. It was from Ambassador Carter. Russell, what the hell do you think you're doing? Carter demanded, his voice tight with anger and fear. I've just learned about your unsanctioned mission. You have to stop this now. Come back to Earth before it's too late. Russell's grip tightened on the communicator. I can't do that, John, he said softly. I started this, and I have to finish it. For Lily. Damn it, Russell, this isn't about Lily anymore, Carter shouted. This is about the fate of humanity. If you fail, if you start another war with the Saurians, the consequences will be catastrophic. Please, I'm begging you, don't do this. Russell closed his eyes, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders, but in his heart, he knew there was only one choice he could make. I'm sorry, John, he said, but I have to see this through, not just for Lily, but for all of us. I won't let Zephyr and the SLF tear our species apart. I swear to you, I will end this, whatever it takes. With that, he cut the connection, turning to face his team. Kazarak, still weak but determined, stood alongside Zortak, the unlikely allies united in their cause. "All right, listen up," Russell barked. "We've got one shot at this, one chance to stop the SLF and bring Zephyr to justice. It won't be easy, and some of us may not make it back. But we're the only thing standing between that fanatic and the destruction of everything we hold dear. So let's get out there and show them what humanity is made of. Ura?" "Hurrah!" the team echoed, their voices ringing with grim resolve. As the transport lifted off, carrying them toward the heart of darkness, Russell stared out the window at the alien landscape blurring beneath them. Somewhere out there, Zephyr was waiting, plotting his next move in this deadly game of chess. But this time, Russell swore, the game would end on humanity's terms, no matter the cost. The dense jungle canopy closed in around Russell and his team as they pushed deeper into the southern continent's wilderness. Vines snatched at their gear, thorns tore at their skin, and the heat pressed down like a physical weight. Mike slashed through the foliage with his machete, Kazarak following close behind, plasma rifle at the ready. A piercing shriek echoed through the trees, and a monstrous insectoid creature burst from the shadows, all snapping pincers and razor-sharp limbs. It lunged for Colonel Hawkins, but a burst of plasma fire from James's rifle sent it reeling back, carapace smoldering. More shrieks answered from the jungle depths, and soon the team was fighting for their lives, a tide of chitin and claws crashing against their weapons and armor. Russell emptied his rifle's power cell into a lunging monstrosity, its acid blood sizzling on the jungle floor. In the chaos, Mike stumbled, a creature's barbed stinger punching clean through his leg. He screamed, arterial blood spraying, and Russell surged to his side, combat knife flashing as he hacked the creature apart. "Hold on, Mike," Russell shouted over the din of battle. He dragged his wounded friend to safety as the rest of the team formed a perimeter, Kazrak and Zortak spitting orders in Saurian battle tongue. They beat back the attack, leaving twitching insectoid corpses strewn across the jungle floor. James and Colonel Hawkins worked frantically to stabilize Mike's wound, the kid pale and shaking, teeth gritted against the pain. "He's losing too much blood," Zortak hissed, scaled hands pressed against the gushing wound. "We need to cauterize now." Russell didn't hesitate. He grabbed a plasma grenade from his belt, twisted the primer, and held it close to Mike's leg. The searing heat of the primed grenade made Mike scream, the stench of cooking meat filling the air. But when Russell pulled it away, the bleeding had stopped, the wound seared shut. They pushed on. Mike slung between James and Colonel Hawkins, jaw clenched against the agony in his leg. Each step was a battle, the jungle throwing every obstacle in their path. Ravines yawned before them, rickety rope bridges their only way across. Quicksand sucked at their boots, Kazarak hauling them free with his superior Saurian strength. And the SLF were out there, stalking them through the dense foliage. Plasma bolts sizzled through the leaves, and the team hit the dirt, crawling through the muck as rebel Saurians closed in. Zortak took a bolt to the shoulder, scales blackening, but he pushed on, fangs bared in a defiant snarl. They fought their way clear, leaving rebel corpses cooling on the jungle floor. Russell took a moment to catch his breath, sweat and blood mingling on his skin. They were close now. He could feel it. Zephyr was out there, waiting. As they crested a ridge, a hidden village came into view below. Ramshackle huts clustered around a bubbling spring. Saurian civilians, scales dull with malnutrition, stared up at the armed humans with a mix of fear and desperate hope. A young Saurian child broke from the crowd and approached, his eyes haunted. "I am Torzak," he said, his voice thin and reedy. "The SLF killed my parents. Zephyr killed them. Are you here to stop him?" Russell knelt before the boy, meeting his gaze. "Yes," he said. "We're here to bring Zephyr to justice. Can you help us?" Torzak nodded, a flicker of determination in his slitted eyes. "I can show you the way," he said. "The tunnel's under the jungle. Zephyr's base is on the other side." Russell glanced at his team, seeing the same resolve etched on their faces. They would follow this child into the dark, if it meant ending Zephyr's reign of terror. For the civilians of this village, For little Lily. For the future. They descended into the tunnels, the air heavy and rank. Torzak led the way, his clawed feet sure on the uneven ground. As they walked, he spoke of the hardships his people had endured under SLF rule, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. Zephyr takes what he wants, Torzak said. Food, weapons, females. Anyone who resists, he kills. We live in fear every day. Kazrak laid a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder, his eyes hard. Not for much longer, he growled. Light appeared ahead and they emerged into a small clearing, the jungle abruptly giving way to towering metal walls. Watchtowers loomed above, spotlight beams crisscrossing the perimeter. This was Zephyr's stronghold. Colonel Hawkins called up schematics on his wrist display, the holographic base rotating slowly. All right, listen up, he barked. We've got sentries on the walls, auto turrets covering the gate, and patrols inside the compound. We need to hit them hard and fast, from multiple angles. Snipers, take out those sentries. Demo team, breach the walls. The rest of you, with me. We're the hammer. As the team moved into position, Russell closed his eyes, Lily's face swimming before him. Her laugh, her smile, the way her tiny hand felt in his, and then the ruin of her ruined body, cradled in his arms. Beside him, James laid a hand on his shoulder, eyes fierce. For Lily, he said. For Lily, Russell echoed. For Ambassador Carter, grieving and broken. For Torzak and his people, living under the shadow of a tyrant. For every innocent life shattered by Zephyr's cruelty. Russell raised his rifle, the weapon, an extension of his will, his purpose. It was time to end this. One way or another, Zephyr's reign ended today. The first sniper shots rang out, and the compound erupted into chaos. Russell charged forward, a battle cry on his lips, his team at his side. The final battle had begun. The first sniper shots rang out, and the compound erupted into chaos. Russell charged forward, a battle cry on his lips, his team at his side. The final battle had begun. Colonel Hawkins's frontal assault on the main gate drew the attention of the bulk of the SLF forces. Heavy plasma fire rained down on his position, the air sizzling with deadly energy. But the UEG Special Forces were the best of the best, and they pushed forward with relentless determination, laying down suppressing fire and forcing the SLF defenders to take cover. Under the cover of the chaos, Russell, Kazarak, and a small team of specialists slipped away from the main battle, guided by Torzak. The young Saurian led them to a hidden entrance to the underground tunnels, and they descended into the darkness, their weapons at the ready. The tunnels were a labyrinth of twisting passages and shadowy chambers, and the team moved cautiously, checking their corners and watching for any sign of movement. Torzak navigated the maze with the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours exploring its secrets, his clawed feet silent on the stone floor. Suddenly, a plasma bolt sizzled past Russell's head, and he dove for cover as a group of SLF guards emerged from a side tunnel. The team reacted instantly, returning fire with their own weapons. The tunnel erupted into a fierce close-quarters battle, plasma bolts ricocheting off the walls and lighting up the darkness with deadly flashes. Russell and Kazrak fought side by side, their movements fluid and synchronized as they took down one guard after another. Zortak, armed with a modified plasma rifle, provided covering fire, his keen saurian eyes picking out targets in the gloom. As the last of the guards fell, the team pressed forward, deeper into the heart of the base. They encountered more pockets of resistance along the way, but they were relentless, driven by a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. Zortak proved his worth time and again, using his medical expertise to treat the wounds of injured team members, and even developing improvised chemical weapons to neutralize SLF forces. His knowledge of Saurian physiology was invaluable, and he worked tirelessly to keep the team in fighting shape. As they delved deeper into the base, they stumbled upon a hidden chamber tucked away in a remote corner of the complex. Inside, they found something that made their blood run cold. Rows upon rows of advanced weaponry, each more deadly than the last. And at the center of it all, a single canister, glowing with an eerie green light. A neurotoxin, Zortak realized with a start. A weapon designed to target specific genetic markers, to eradicate humans while leaving Saurians unharmed. The true scope of Zephyr's plan became clear in that moment. This was no mere power grab, no simple bid for supremacy. This was genocide, on a scale that defied comprehension. Russell's hands shook with rage as he stared at the canister, his mind reeling with the implications. Lily's death, the attack on the embassy, the SLF's relentless campaign of terror. It had all been leading to this, to the extermination of an entire species. "We have to stop him," Russell said, his voice hard with determination. "We have to find Zephyr and put an end to this, once and for all." The team nodded in agreement, their faces set with newfound resolve. They had come too far, sacrificed too much to let Zephyr succeed. They would stop him or die trying. They battled their way through the heart of the base, facing waves of SLF elite guards and automated defense systems. Plasma bolts filled the air, and the stench of burning flesh and ozone was overwhelming. But still, they pushed forward, driven by a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. In a pivotal moment, Torzak spotted a deadly trap ahead, a pressure plate that would trigger a massive explosion. Without hesitation, he shoved Russell out of the way, taking the brunt of the blast himself. His small body was thrown like a rag doll, his scales charred and smoking. Russell scrambled to his side, cradling the young Saurian in his arms. Torzak looked up at him, his eyes glazed with pain. "Go," he whispered. "Stop Zephyr. Save everyone." With a final shuddering breath, Torzak went limp, his life snuffed out in an instant of selfless bravery. Russell felt a surge of grief and rage, hot tears stinging his eyes. But he couldn't stop, couldn't let Torzak's sacrifice be in vain. They reached the central command center, and there they found Zephyr, his claws poised over a control panel, ready to unleash the neurotoxin on an unsuspecting galaxy. Russell let out a roar of fury and launched himself at the Saurian, tackling him to the ground. They grappled with each other, trading blows with savage intensity. Zephyr was strong, his scales hard as rock, but Russell was fueled by a lifetime of training and a burning need for justice. He pummeled the terrorist leader with his fists, feeling bones crack and scales shatter. Behind him, Kazarak worked frantically to hack into the base's computer systems, his fingers flying over the controls. "I can initiate a self-destruct sequence," he shouted over the din of battle. "It's the only way to destroy the neurotoxin and prevent its release." Russell nodded, never taking his eyes off Zephyr. He had to buy Kazarak time, had to keep the Saurian occupied. He redoubled his efforts, raining down blows with relentless fury. Zephyr fought back with equal ferocity, his claws raking deep gashes across Russell's face and arms. But the human refused to yield, refused to let the terrorist win. With a final desperate surge of strength, he wrapped his hands around Zephyr's throat and squeezed with all his might. The Saurian thrashed and bucked, his eyes bulging in their sockets. But Russell held on, his grip like iron. He could feel Zephyr's pulse weakening, his struggles growing feeble. It would be so easy to end it here, to snap the bastard's neck and be done with it. But that wasn't who Russell was. He was a soldier, not a murderer. He would bring Zephyr to justice, make him face the consequences of his actions. With a final, wrenching effort, he released his grip and staggered back, leaving the Saurian gasping on the floor. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," Kazarak shouted. "We have to get out of here now." Russell hauled Zephyr to his feet, the terrorist leader too dazed to resist. They ran for the exit, the base shuddering and shaking around them as the countdown ticked away. Debris rained down from the ceiling, and the air was thick with smoke and dust. They burst out of the base just as the final explosion ripped through the complex, a massive fireball consuming everything in its path. The shockwave knocked them off their feet, and they lay there in the dirt, gasping for breath. Colonel Hawkins and the rest of the assault team emerged from the smoke, their faces streaked with grime and sweat. They had done it. The SLF base was destroyed, its forces scattered to the wind, and Zephyr, the architect of so much suffering and death, was in custody. But as Russell looked around at his battered, bleeding team, he knew that the cost had been high. Torzak was gone, his young life cut tragically short, and they were all forever changed by what they had seen and done. But they had struck a blow for justice, for the future of both their species. And for the first time in a long time, Russell felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be long and hard, but they had taken the first step, and they would keep fighting, no matter the cost. The shuttle touched down on the landing pad outside the Saurian Capitol building, its engines whining as they powered down. Russell stepped out into the bright sunlight, Zephyr's limp form slung over his shoulder. Kazarak and the rest of the team followed close behind, their weapons at the ready. A crowd of Saurian civilians had gathered around the landing pad, their eyes wide with disbelief as they saw the human warriors emerge victorious. As Russell strode forward, the crowd parted before him, whispers of awe and gratitude rippling through their ranks. He defeated Zephyr. We're free. The SLF's reign of terror is over. Russell barely registered their words, his focus entirely on the task at hand. He had to get Zephyr into custody to ensure that the terrorist leader could never again threaten the fragile peace between their species. But as they approached the Capitol building, a series of explosions rocked the city, sending plumes of smoke and debris into the air. Alarms blared and Saurian security forces scrambled to respond, their scales flashing in the chaos. "What the hell?" James shouted, ducking as a chunk of rubble whizzed past his head. Kazarak's eyes narrowed, his voice grim. "The SLF. They're launching an all-out attack. Zephyr must have sent a signal to his followers before we captured him." Russell cursed under his breath, realizing the depth of their enemy's planning. Even in defeat, Zephyr had one last trick up his sleeve. "We need to split up," he barked, his mind racing. "Mike, James, Zortak, help the Saurian forces contain the damage and protect the civilians. Kazarak and I will secure the Prime Minister." The team nodded, their faces set with determination as they split off to their assigned tasks. Russell and Kazarak sprinted towards the Capitol building, dodging rubble and plasma fire as they went. Inside, the building was in chaos, with Saurian bureaucrats and security personnel running in every direction. Russell and Kazarak pushed their way through the panicked crowds, their eyes scanning for any sign of the Prime Minister. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a group of SLF insurgents, their weapons aimed directly at the two warriors. The leader of the group, a scarred and battle-hardened Saurian named Zaxtor, stepped forward, his eyes glinting with malice. "Surrender the traitor, Zephyr," Zaxtor growled, "or die where you stand, human scum." Russell's grip tightened on his rifle, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, but he couldn't let Zephyr fall back into SLF hands. Beside him, Kazarak tensed, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. The two warriors exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. Then, with a roar of defiance, they charged forward, plasma bolts filling the air as they engaged the SLF in desperate close-quarters combat. Russell ducked and weaved, his rifle barking as he took down one insurgent after another. Kazarak fought like a demon, his claws and tail lashing out with deadly precision. But even as they fought, more SLF poured into the building, drawn by the sound of battle. Russell knew they couldn't hold out forever. They had to reach the Prime Minister before it was too late. With a final burst of fire, they cleared a path through the insurgents and sprinted down the hallway, their hearts pounding in their chests. They burst into the Prime Minister's office only to find Korzak being held at gunpoint by Zaxtor himself. "Drop your weapons," Zaxtor snarled, "or the Prime Minister dies." Russell hesitated, his mind racing as he tried to find a way out of the standoff. He couldn't let Korzak die, but he also couldn't let Zephyr go free. Beside him, Kazarak tensed, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. The two warriors exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. "Let's talk about this," Russell said, his voice calm and even as he slowly lowered his rifle. "There's no need for anyone else to die today." Zaxtor sneered, his grip on Korzak tightening. Spare me your platitudes, human. Release Zephyr, or watch your precious Prime Minister's brains splatter across the wall. As Russell kept Zaxtor talking, Kazrak inched closer, his movements slow and deliberate. The SLF operative was so focused on Russell that he didn't notice the Saurian warrior's approach until it was too late. With a lightning-fast move, Kazrak lunged forward, his claws wrapping around Zaxtor's gun and wrenching it from his grasp. The SLF operative roared in fury, but before he could react, Russell was on him, his fists pummeling the Saurian into submission. In moments, it was over. Zaxtor lay unconscious on the floor, and Korzak was safe, his eyes wide with shock and relief. "Thank you," the Prime Minister said, his voice shaking. "I owe you my life." But Russell wasn't listening. His mind was reeling with the implications of what had just happened. The SLF's reach was far greater than they had ever imagined, and their influence extended beyond just the Saurian government. "Prime Minister," he said, his voice urgent, "I need you to tell me everything you know about the SLF's connections to the UEG. Lives depend on it." Korzak hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, but not here. Come with me." As they followed the Prime Minister deeper into the building, Russell's mind raced with the possibilities of what they might uncover. The SLF's treachery seemed to know no bounds, and the thought of high-ranking UEG officials collaborating with the terrorists made his blood boil. But even as they delved deeper into the conspiracy, Russell knew that this was just the beginning. The SLF's influence ran deep, and rooting out the corruption within both the Saurian government and the UEG would be a long and perilous road. But with Kazrak and the rest of his team by his side, Russell was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the sake of both their species, they would see this through to the end. As they emerged into a secure room deep within the Capitol building, Korzak turned to face them, his expression grave. "What I am about to show you," he said, "could shake the very foundations of the UEG and the Saurian government. But you must know the truth." With that, he activated a holographic display, and a flood of data spilled out before them. Encrypted communications, financial records, and classified documents, all pointing to a vast web of corruption and deceit that extended to the highest levels of both governments. Russell stared at the evidence, his jaw clenched with rage. Names he recognized, people he had once trusted, all revealed to be in league with the SLF. And at the center of it all, a shadowy figure known only as the Benefactor. "Who is this Benefactor?" Russell demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Korzak shook his head. "I don't know, but whoever they are, they have been manipulating events from behind the scenes for years, playing both sides against each other for their own gain." Kazrak growled, his claws flexing with the need for action. "We have to stop them. We have to expose this corruption and bring the traitors to justice." Russell nodded, his mind already racing with plans and possibilities. It would be the most difficult and dangerous mission of his life, but he knew he had no choice. The fate of both their species hung in the balance. "We'll need help," he said, turning to Korzak. "Allies we can trust, both human and Saurian. Can you provide that?" The Prime Minister hesitated, then nodded. "I will do whatever is necessary to protect my people and ensure a future of peace between our kinds. You have my full support." With that, the die was cast. Russell and his team had a new mission, one that would take them to the very heart of the corruption that threatened to tear their worlds apart. As they left the secure room, Russell's mind was already racing with the challenges ahead. They would have to be careful, moving in secret and striking with precision to avoid tipping off their enemies. But with the truth on their side and the strength of their convictions, he knew they could prevail. The road ahead would be long and perilous, but Russell was ready to walk it. For Lily, for the future, for the sake of all those he held dear, he would see this through to the bitter end. As the team regrouped in a safe house on the outskirts of Serapolis, the weight of their new mission hung heavy in the air. They tended to their wounds and checked their gear, each lost in their own thoughts of the challenges to come. Mike winced as Zortak applied a healing salve to the plasma burns on his arm, the Saurian doctor's touch surprisingly gentle for one so fierce in battle. "Never thought I'd be fighting alongside a Saurian," Mike muttered, his voice tinged with a mix of pain and grudging respect. Zortak chuckled, his scaled face splitting in a toothy grin. "And I never thought I'd be patching up a human. But here we are." Across the room, James and Kazarak pored over the holographic display of the data Korzak had provided, their faces grim as they took in the scope of the conspiracy. "This goes deeper than we ever imagined," James said, his voice low and tense. "The benefactor's influence is everywhere, in every level of both governments." Kazarak nodded, his claws tracing the intricate web of connections. "Exposing this corruption will not be easy. We will face opposition at every turn, from those who seek to maintain their power and privilege." Russell listened to their conversations, his mind whirling with the implications of what they had learned. The task before them was daunting, but he knew they had no choice but to press forward. "We'll have to move carefully," he said, drawing their attention. "We can't trust anyone outside this room, not until we know the full extent of the benefactor's reach. From now on, we operate in the shadows, gathering evidence and building alliances until we're ready to strike." The others nodded, their expressions hardening with resolve. They knew the risks, knew that they were putting their lives on the line for a cause greater than themselves. But as Russell looked around at his team, the humans and Saurians united in purpose, he felt a surge of hope. They had already accomplished the impossible, had forged bonds of trust and friendship across the divide of species. Together, they would see this through. Together, they would root out the corruption and bring the traitors to justice. And together, they would build a future of peace and understanding between their kinds. It would not be easy, and the road ahead would be fraught with danger and sacrifice. But as the team began to plan their next move, Russell felt a sense of calm determination settle over him. They had a purpose, a mission, and the strength of their convictions to guide them. And with that, he knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The room buzzed with a quiet intensity as the team worked, each focused on their own tasks. Zortik and Mike inventoried their medical supplies, while James and Kazarak continued to analyze the data, searching for patterns and weak points in the benefactor's network. Russell himself paced the room, his mind racing as he tried to anticipate their enemy's next move. The SLF had been dealt a heavy blow, but he knew they were far from defeated. And with the revelation of the benefactor's existence, the scope of the threat had expanded dramatically. They would have to be smart, staying one step ahead of their foes and striking where they least expected it. They would have to be brave, willing to risk everything for the sake of their mission. And above all, they would have to be united, standing together against the forces that sought to tear them apart. As the hours ticked by and the plan began to take shape, Russell felt a growing sense of purpose and determination. They had a long road ahead of them, but he knew that with his team by his side, there was nothing they couldn't achieve. And so, as the twin suns of Zephyria began to set over the horizon, casting the safe house in a warm, golden glow, Russell gathered his team together one last time. "All right, listen up," he said, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "We've got our work cut out for us, but I know we're up to the task. We're going to take this fight to the enemy, and we're not going to stop until the truth is revealed and justice is served." He looked around at each of them in turn, Mike and James, his human brothers in arms, Kazarak and Zortak, his Saurian comrades, and the newest member of their team, Korzak, the prime minister who had risked everything to stand with them. "It won't be easy," Russell continued, "and there will be times when we'll want to give up, but we can't let that happen. We have to stay strong, stay focused, and stay together, because that's the only way we're going to win this fight." The others nodded, their expressions fierce and determined. They knew the stakes, knew the sacrifices they would have to make, but they also knew that they had each other and that together they were stronger than anything the enemy could throw at them. With a final nod, Russell shouldered his pack and checked his weapons. "All right, team, let's move out. We've got a war to win." And with that, they stepped out into the gathering darkness, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The battle for the future had begun, and they would not rest until victory was theirs. As the team regrouped in the safe house, Russell wasted no time. He pulled out the data drive Korzak had given him. "This is it," he said grimly. "Evidence of corruption at the highest levels of the UEG. Names, dates, money trails, it's all here." Colonel Hawkins took the drive, his face hardening as he scanned the files. "Jesus, if this is true—" "It is," Russell said firmly, "and we're going to expose it. We're going back to Earth." The journey was tense, the team on high alert for any sign of SLF or UEG interference. But they made it to Earth unchallenged, the blue marble of humanity's homeworld filling the viewports as they descended into atmosphere. They landed in New York, the towering spires of the UEG headquarters looming over the cityscape. Russell led the way, the data drive clutched in his hand, his team flanking him as they marched into the building. "We need to see the Security Council now," he barked at the receptionist. "We have evidence of treason at the highest levels of government." But before the receptionist could respond, a voice rang out across the lobby. "Russell Green, you're under arrest for treason against the United Earth government." Russell spun to see a phalanx of armed soldiers filling the lobby, weapons trained on him and his team. At their head stood a figure he recognized all too well, General Marcus Blackwell, his former commanding officer and a man he had once respected. "Blackwell?" Russell said, his voice tight with anger. "What the hell are you doing?" The general stepped forward, his face a mask of cold fury. "I'm arresting a traitor, Green. Did you really think you could collaborate with the Saurians and get away with it? That you could undermine the security of the human race and not face consequences?" Russell's mind reeled. Collaborate with the Saurians? Undermine human security? The accusations were absurd, baseless, but as he looked around at the soldiers, he saw in their eyes that they believed it. Blackwell had gotten to them first. "You're wrong," Russell growled, his hand tightening on the data drive. "We have proof of corruption, of UEG officials working with the SLF. You're the traitor here, Blackwell. You and everyone else on the SLF's payroll." Blackwell laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Proof? All I see is a rogue agent and his alien-loving friends. No one's going to believe your lies, Green. You're finished." He gestured to his soldiers. "Take them into custody. Maximum security. No one sees them. No one talks to them. They rot in a cell until I say otherwise." The soldiers moved in, weapons at the ready. Russell tensed, preparing to fight, but a hand on his shoulder stopped him. It was Colonel Hawkins, his eyes hard and steady. "Not here," the colonel muttered under his breath. "We're outgunned. We need to regroup, find allies. This isn't over." Russell wanted to argue, to stand and fight, but he knew Hawkins was right. They couldn't win this, not now. With a curt nod, he allowed himself to be disarmed, the data drive wrenched from his grasp. As the cuffs snapped around his wrists, he locked eyes with Blackwell, a silent promise passing between them. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. They were hustled out of the building and into a waiting transport, armed guards on all sides. As the vehicle sped through the city streets, Russell's mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Blackwell had called him a traitor, accused him of working with the Saurians, but that was impossible, unless... A chill ran down Russell's spine as the pieces fell into place. Blackwell himself was working with the SLF. He had to be. It was the only explanation that made sense. The general was using his position to further the SLF's goals, to sow chaos and discord between humans and Saurians. And now he had painted Russell and his team as the enemy, turned the UEG against them. They were on their own, fugitives in the heart of human space. The transport jolted to a halt and the doors slid open. But instead of a UEG detention center, Russell found himself staring out at the grimy, graffiti-covered walls of the New York Undercity. A hooded figure stepped into view, a woman's voice emerging from the shadows. "Russell Green, I'm Ghost. We need to talk." Russell exchanged a glance with Hawkins, then stepped out of the transport into the unknown. They had a long road ahead of them, and the odds were stacked against them. But one thing was certain. They wouldn't stop until the truth was revealed, and justice was served, no matter the cost. As the fateful day of the livestream approached, Russell and his team sprang into action, their hearts pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. They knew that the success of their mission hinged on this moment, that the truth they had fought so hard to uncover would finally be revealed to the galaxy. With the help of Julia Reeves's resistance contacts, they slipped into the UEG headquarters like ghosts, their movements swift and silent. The towering skyscraper loomed above them, a gleaming monument to human power and ambition, but they knew that beneath its polished surface lay a rot that threatened to consume everything they held dear. They made their way to the council chamber, their weapons at the ready, their faces etched with grim determination. As they burst through the doors, the startled council members leapt to their feet, their eyes wide with shock and fear. "Nobody move!" Russell barked, his voice ringing with authority. "This is a reckoning!" He and his team quickly secured the room, locking down the entrances and disarming the security personnel. The council members huddled together, their expressions a mix of outrage and confusion. Russell stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the assembled dignitaries. "People of the galaxy," he began, his voice steady as he activated the live stream. "I am Russell Green, and I stand before you today to expose the truth that has been hidden from you for too long." As he spoke, he presented the evidence they had gathered, the damning proof of the UEG's corruption and the SLF's insidious influence. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing encrypted communications, financial records, and secret meetings between high-ranking officials and Saurian extremists. The council members watched in growing horror as the extent of the conspiracy was laid bare before them. Some tried to flee, only to be apprehended by Colonel Hawkins and his men, their faces pale with fear and guilt. But just as Russell was about to deliver his final blow, the chamber doors burst open once more, and General Blackwell strode in, flanked by a group of heavily armed loyalists. "Enough!" Blackwell roared, his eyes blazing with fury. "Surrender now, Green, or I'll start putting bullets in these traitorous bastards." Russell stood his ground, his hand tightening on his weapon. "It's over, Blackwell," he said, his voice cold as ice. "The truth is out. You can't stop it now." But Blackwell only laughed, a harsh, jagged sound that sent chills down Russell's spine. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "You've only just scratched the surface of what we're capable of. The SLF will rise, and humanity will take its rightful place as the masters of the galaxy." The standoff stretched on, the tension in the room rising to a fever pitch. Russell knew that he couldn't back down, that too much was at stake. But as he stared into Blackwell's eyes, he saw a madness there, a hatred that could not be reasoned with. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the building, sending tremors through the floor and walls. Alarms blared, and the sound of gunfire echoed from the corridors outside. "What the hell?" Blackwell snarled, spinning to face the doors. And then, like a scene from a nightmare, a group of Saurian rebels burst into the chamber, their scales gleaming in the harsh light, their weapons spitting plasma fire. At their head was Kazrak, his face a mask of determination and rage. "For Zephyria!" he roared, and the rebels charged forward, engaging Blackwell's forces in a brutal close-quarters battle. In the chaos, Russell lunged for Blackwell, his fists flying. They traded blows, their bodies slamming into walls and furniture as they grappled with each other. "It doesn't have to be this way," Russell shouted, dodging a vicious punch. "We can still make this right, Blackwell. We can still find a way to peace." But Blackwell only snarled, his eyes wild with hatred. "Peace," he spat. "There can be no peace as long as your kind exists, Green. You're a cancer on the galaxy, and I will burn you out, root and stem." They fought on, their bodies battered and bruised, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Around them, the battle raged, plasma bolts sizzling through the air, bodies falling to the ground in sprays of blood and gore. And then, just as Blackwell seemed to gain the upper hand, a shot rang out, clear and sharp above the din of combat. Blackwell stiffened, his eyes going wide with shock and pain. He stumbled back, clutching at his chest, and fell to the ground, his life's blood pooling beneath him. Russell spun, his heart pounding, and saw Zortok standing there, a smoking plasma pistol in his hand. The Saurian doctor met his gaze, his eyes hard and unflinching. "For Kazarak," he said simply, "for all of us." As Blackwell's loyalists surrendered, the council members emerged from their hiding places, their faces pale and shaken. They looked to Russell, to the evidence still flickering on the holographic displays, and knew that they had no choice but to act. "The conspirators will be brought to justice," the council leader said, his voice trembling. "The SLF will be dismantled, and a new era of peace and cooperation will begin. Thanks to you, Mr. Green. Thanks to all of you." Russell nodded, his heart swelling with a fierce, bittersweet pride. They had done it. They had won. But the cost had been high, and the scars would linger long after the dust had settled. He turned to his team, to the humans and Saurians who had fought and bled by his side, and saw in their eyes the same determination, the same hope for a better future. "It's not over yet," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We still have work to do, but together we can build something new, something better." And as they stood there, amidst the ruins of the old order, the galaxy trembled on the brink of change, and the future stretched out before them, bright and full of promise. In the wake of the galaxy-shaking revelations at UEG headquarters, Russell and his battered but unbroken team were called upon once more. The UEG Security Council, now purged of its traitorous elements, tasked them with hunting down the scattered remnants of the SLF network and bringing their leaders to justice. "We cannot allow the SLF threat to fester," declared Councillor Xian, her holographic image flickering with resolve. "Captain Green, you and your team have proven yourselves humanity's greatest champions. Work with our new Saurian allies to cut out this cancer once and for all." Russell nodded grimly, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Around him, the others, Mike, James, Zortak, Torzak, stood ready, united by bonds forged in blood and fire. Their first target was a remote training camp on the jungle moon of Kazarak, where SLF fanatics were twisting young minds with their poisonous ideology. Russell and his team would infiltrate the facility posing as new recruits, gathering intel on the SLF's chain of command while searching for clues to their next move. The jungle air was thick and cloying as they marched into the camp, a motley band of human and Saurian initiates. Russell felt a bead of sweat trickle down his spine, his senses hyper-alert. Beside him, Kazarak's eyes darted warily, his claws flexing with anticipation. The days that followed were a grueling blur of physical training and mental conditioning designed to break down individuality and instill blind obedience. Russell and his team endured, playing their roles, biding their time. In snatched moments of respite, they gathered in secret, piecing together whispered fragments of conversations overheard, stolen glances at classified files. A disturbing picture began to emerge. "The neurotoxin," Kazarak growled. "They're refining it, targeting specific human genetic markers. They want to turn us against each other, watch us tear ourselves apart." Russell's blood ran cold. The SLF's ambitions went beyond mere genocide. They sought to sow chaos and discord on an unimaginable scale, to shatter the fragile peace so many had died to achieve. They had to act, and soon, but their window was closing fast. Russell could feel the suspicious eyes of the SLF instructors boring into him, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. It all came to a head in the combat simulator, a final test of loyalty. As the holograms of human soldiers flickered to life around them, Russell caught the glint of real steel in their instructor's hand. The trap was sprung. Plasma fire filled the air as Russell and his team went back to back, human and Saurian moving as one against the oncoming tide of fanatics. Mike and James fought with grim efficiency, Torzak's rebel fighters joining the fray with rebel yells. But the SLF forces were relentless, pouring into the room in a never-ending wave. Slowly, inexorably, Russell's team was pushed back, forced towards the brink. They needed an exit, and fast. "Go!" Kazarak roared suddenly, shoving Russell towards a service hatch. "I'll hold them off!" No! Russell shouted, but it was too late. Kazrak was already charging, a one-man army, his plasma rifle spitting blue fire. Saurians fell before him, but more took their place, the weight of numbers driving him back. With an anguished howl, Russell led the retreat, Mike and the others laying down covering fire as they raced for the hatch. The last thing he saw was Kazrak, alone and defiant, disappearing beneath a mob of slashing claws and thudding fists. They made it to the extraction point, battered and bloody, the taste of ashes in their mouths. Russell wanted to scream, to rage at the uncaring stars, but there was no time. Kazrak's sacrifice could not be in vain. As they regrouped aboard the UEG frigate, a priority message blinked on the comm screen. It was Zortak, his normally impassive features tight with urgency. "I've analyzed the data from the facility," he said without preamble. "I know where they're making the neurotoxin. A research station hidden in the Argon Nebula. But Captain, if they finish the next batch..." He didn't need to say more. The fate of every man, woman, and child in the galaxy hung in the balance. One misstep, and the SLF's horrific vision would become a reality. Russell's fists clenched, his eyes hard as flint. Kazrak was gone, but his spirit lived on in the hearts of all those who had followed him. Human and Saurian, united by a dream of peace, of a future where their children could grow and prosper, free from the shadow of hate. He looked to Torzak, the boy turned warrior, and saw his own determination mirrored there. For Kazrak, for Lily, for the dream. The SLF had sown the wind. Now they would reap the whirlwind. As the twin moons of Zorthak hung in the starry void, the Allied strike force converged on the SLF research station. Dropships disgorged squads of human and Saurian commandos, their armor glinting in the cold light. Russell gripped his plasma rifle, Torzak at his side, as they charged up the boarding ramp. The station's klaxons blared as the infiltrators breached the outer airlock. SLF troopers swarmed to defensive positions, plasma bolts sizzling through the recycled air. Russell and Torzak hit them in a blaze of searing blue fire, scales and ceramic armor shattering. They pushed deeper, the tight corridors ringing with the clash of weapons and the screams of the wounded. Russell slammed a fresh power cell into his rifle, downing an SLF guard with a shot to the head. Torzak lashed out with his razor-sharp claws, alien blood spraying the bulkheads. On the command deck, Colonel Hawkins and Julia fought their own battle, lines of code their ammunition. Hawkins hunched over a flickering terminal, his fingers flying over the keys as he fought to penetrate the station's firewalls. Julia covered his back, picking off SLF hackers with deadly precision. "I'm in!" Hawkins cried as the final firewall crumbled. His hands danced across the controls, the station's defenses falling away one by one. The SLF command crew scrambled to mount a counterattack, but it was too late. The station was wide open. In the research archives, Zortak and his scientific team met fierce resistance. SLF researchers, more at home with test tubes than plasma rifles, nonetheless fought with desperate ferocity to protect their evil work. Zortak led the charge, his medical expertise turned to the grim work of war. They cut down the defenders in a flurry of plasma bolts and slashing claws, the metallic tang of blood mixing with the acrid stench of burnt circuits. Zortak lunged for the central data core, ripping through the encryption with single-minded determination. The secrets of the neurotoxin, the key to stopping it, lay within his grasp. But as the download began, a fresh wave of SLF guards flooded into the archives. Zortak roared a challenge, placing himself between the attackers and the precious data. His team rallied around him, ready to lay down their lives for the cause. In the main research lab, Russell and Torzak confronted the twisted mastermind behind the neurotoxin, Dr. Zakstar. The Saurian scientist cackled with glee, his clawed fingers hovering over the release controls. "You're too late," he crowed. "In minutes the toxin will flood this station, and your pathetic alliance will choke on its own blood." Russell snarled, bringing his rifle to bear, but Zakstar was shielded behind a crackling energy field. Torzak leapt forward, his claws skittering across the control panel. He had to stop the release, even if it cost him everything. The two Saurians grappled. Zaxtar's mad strength pitted against Torzak's desperate resolve. Russell hammered at the energy field with plasma blasts, trying to break through. The seconds ticked down, the fate of thousands hanging in the balance. With a final defiant roar, Torzak ripped the release lever from its housing, the mechanism sparking and sputtering. The neurotoxin tank shuddered and went still, the deadly payload contained. But as the lever came free, a jet of toxic green gas sprayed directly into Torzak's face. The young Saurian fell, choking and convulsing, as Russell charged through the weakened energy field. He cut down Zaxtar with a point-blank plasma blast to the skull, then gathered Torzak in his arms. "Hold on, kid," he pleaded, tears stinging his eyes. "Just hold on." But even as he spoke, he could see the light fading from Torzak's eyes, the neurotoxin ravaging his body. With his last breath, the brave young Saurian pressed the detonator into Russell's hand. "Finish it," he gasped, "for all of us." As Torzak went limp, Russell let out a howl of anguish and rage. He armed the explosives with trembling fingers, then carried his fallen comrade's body out of the lab. The charges he had planted throughout the station beeped their deadly countdown. He met up with the other teams in the hangar bay, Zortak clutching the precious neurotoxin data. They piled into the waiting dropships as the first explosions began to rip through the station's superstructure. The ships blasted free, just as the research station bloomed into a miniature sun, a funeral pyre for the horrors it had contained and for the brave soul who had given his life to stop them. As the wreckage burned behind them and the Allied fleet moved in to secure the area, Russell cradled Torzak's body, his heart heavy with grief and grim with purpose. The battle had been won, but at a terrible cost, and he knew that the war was far from over. There would be time to mourn, time to honor the fallen. But for now, they had to press on. For Torzak, for Kazrak, for all those who had sacrificed so that others might live free. The fight continued. As the smoldering wreckage of the SLF research station lit up the void of space, Russell and his battle-weary team made the long journey back to Zephyria. The weight of their losses hung heavy on their shoulders. Kazrak, the brave Saurian warrior who had sacrificed himself to buy their escape. Torzak, the young rebel who had taken a lethal dose of neurotoxin to save them all. But their sacrifice had not been in vain. The SLF's genocidal plans had been thwarted, and a new hope for peace between humans and Saurians had been born. When they touched down on Zephyria's war-torn surface, Russell and his team were greeted as heroes. Throngs of Saurians lined the streets, cheering and chanting their names. In the grand plaza of the capital city, a massive memorial service was held to honor the fallen. Prime Minister Korzak stood before a sea of human and Saurian faces, his voice ringing with emotion as he spoke of the brave sacrifices of Kazrak, Torzak, and all those who had given their lives in the fight against the SLF. "Today, we stand united in our grief and in our hope," Korzak said, his scales glinting in the sunlight. "The road ahead will not be easy, but together, we will rebuild our shattered worlds and forge a lasting peace between our peoples. Let the memory of those we have lost guide us, and let their sacrifice be the foundation upon which we build a better future for all." As the galaxy began the long process of healing, Russell and his team were given a new mission by the UEG. They were to serve as ambassadors and liaisons between the human and Saurian governments, overseeing joint military operations, facilitating cultural exchange programs, and helping to establish a new interspecies council dedicated to maintaining peace and stability. It was a daunting task, but one that Russell and his team embraced with grim determination. They knew that the scars of the war ran deep, and that there were still those on both sides who harbored mistrust and resentment. But they were determined to see their mission through, no matter the cost. Their first challenge came in the form of the Terra Prima movement, a human supremacist organization that had begun to gain traction among the more radical elements of human society. Led by a charismatic and ruthless former UEG colonel named Max Vaughn, the Terra Prima movement sought to undermine the fragile peace and reassert human dominance over the galaxy. Russell and his team worked tirelessly to counter Vaughn's influence, attending rallies and meetings to speak out against his hateful rhetoric. But as they dug deeper, they uncovered a sinister plot involving the remnants of the SLF and a rogue faction within the Saurian military. This unlikely alliance, driven by a shared hatred of the new interspecies order, planned to assassinate key leaders on both sides and reignite the war between humans and Saurians. In a desperate race against time, Russell and his team navigated a complex web of political intrigue and military tensions to prevent the assassination plot from succeeding. They worked alongside their Saurian counterparts in a series of covert operations, hunting down the conspirators and bringing them to justice. But as they closed in on the final pieces of the puzzle, they found themselves in a deadly showdown with Max Vaughn and his Terra Prima followers. Vaughn and his men had managed to infiltrate the Saurian capital and seize control of the government district, holding Prime Minister Korzak and his cabinet hostage. In a brutal street battle, Russell and his allies fought to retake the city and stop Vaughn from executing his twisted plan. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as they clashed with the Terra Prima forces. The once pristine streets of the capital transformed into a war zone. Just as all seemed lost, a surprise ally emerged from the shadows. Zaxtor, the former SLF scientist who had once been their bitter enemy. Zaxtor, who had miraculously survived the destruction of the research station and was now seeking redemption for his past actions, provided critical intelligence that allowed Russell and his team to turn the tide of the battle. With Zaxtor's help, they stormed the government complex, engaging Vaughn and his elite guard in a fierce firefight. Russell and Vaughn faced off in a brutal hand-to-hand clash, trading blows with savage intensity. But in the end, Russell's skill and determination won out. He disarmed Vaughn and forced him to his knees, ending his reign of terror once and for all. In the aftermath of the battle, as the smoke cleared and the wounded were tended to, Russell and his team knew that their work was far from over. The assassination plot may have been thwarted, and the Terra Prima movement defeated, but the deep wounds of the war would take time to heal. Trust would need to be rebuilt, bridges mended, and old hatreds laid to rest. But as he looked out over the war-torn streets of the Saurian capital, Russell felt a flicker of hope. They had come so far, endured so much, and yet here they were, human and Saurian, standing side by side in the face of adversity. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but together they would see it through. In the aftermath of the Terra Prima movement's defeat, a sense of uneasy calm settled over the Saurian capital. Russell and his team, exhausted but resolute, set about the arduous task of rooting out any remaining pockets of resistance and rebuilding the shattered trust between humans and Saurians. It was during one of these long, grueling days that a mysterious figure approached Russell, emerging from the shadows of a dimly lit alleyway. The figure, a Saurian male, introduced himself as Dr. Zortak, a scientist with a troubled past and a desperate plea for help. "Captain Green," Zortak said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and urgency, "I come to you seeking aid in exposing a great injustice, one that threatens the very foundation of the peace we have fought so hard to achieve." Russell, intrigued and wary, listened as Zortak recounted his tale. The scientist had once been part of a secret Saurian government project, one that sought to create a new breed of enhanced soldiers using advanced biotechnology. But when Zortak discovered the project's true purpose and its ties to the SLF, he had tried to blow the whistle, only to be silenced and forced into hiding. "I need your help, Captain," Zortak pleaded. "Together, we can uncover the full extent of this conspiracy and bring those responsible to justice." Russell, his sense of duty and justice piqued, agreed to help. He assembled his team, now joined by Zaxtor, the former SLF scientist who had proven himself a valuable ally in the fight against the Terra Prima movement. Their target was a secret research facility, hidden away on a remote moon deep in Saurian space. As they approached the heavily guarded compound, Russell could feel the tension in the air, the sense that they were walking into the unknown. They breached the facility's defenses, plasma bolts sizzling through the air as they engaged the private military force tasked with protecting the site. The team fought their way deeper into the complex, their weapons hot and their senses sharp. But nothing could have prepared them for what they found within the facility's walls. There, in the stark clinical laboratories, they discovered the fruits of the project's labors, a small army of enhanced Saurian soldiers, each one a living weapon of terrifying power. The soldiers, their scales gleaming with an unnatural sheen, moved with a speed and grace that defied belief. They shrugged off plasma bolts like raindrops, their enhanced muscles and reinforced bones making them all but impervious to conventional weapons. Russell and his team found themselves locked in a desperate battle for survival, their skills and tactics pushed to the limit as they fought to hold back the tide of super soldiers. They fell back, step by step, their ammunition dwindling and their options running out. In that moment of desperation, Zaxter's eyes widened with sudden realization. The soldiers' enhancements, he saw, were based on the same neurotoxin technology he had once helped develop for the SLF. And with that realization came a glimmer of hope. "I can create a counteragent," Zaxtor shouted over the din of battle. "Something to neutralize their enhancements, level the playing field, but I need time." Russell nodded grimly, understanding what needed to be done. "We'll buy you that time," he said, his voice hard with determination. "Whatever it takes." As Zaxtor raced to synthesize the counteragent, Russell and his team dug in, preparing for the fight of their lives. They fortified their position, rigging traps and choke points, anything to slow the advance of the enhanced soldiers. And then, with a roar of fury and the thunder of heavy boots, the soldiers came. They crashed into the team's defenses like a tidal wave, their strength and speed overwhelming. Russell and his comrades fought with everything they had, plasma bolts and fists flying in a brutal, desperate melee. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each second an eternity of violence and fear. Russell felt the ache of exhaustion in his limbs, the sting of sweat and blood in his eyes. But he pushed on, driven by the knowledge that if they failed here, all they had fought for would be lost. Just when all seemed hopeless, Zaxtor's voice crackled over the comm, triumphant and strained. "It's ready," he said, "the counteragent. But you need to get them into the central chamber. Expose them all at once." Russell gritted his teeth, a plan forming in his mind. "Fall back," he ordered his team. "We're going to give them a little surprise." They retreated, leading the enhanced soldiers on a winding path through the facility's corridors. The soldiers followed, relentless and implacable, their eyes glinting with a feral hunger. And then, as they reached the central chamber, Russell and his team sprang their trap. Zaxtor, perched high above on a gantry, released the counteragent, a shimmering cloud of nanobots that filled the air like a glittering mist. The soldiers, caught in the heart of the swarm, stumbled and faltered. Their enhancements flickered and died, the unnatural light fading from their eyes. And in that moment of vulnerability, Russell and his team struck. The battle was swift and brutal, the enhanced soldiers no match for the team's skill and determination, now that their abilities had been neutralized. In a matter of minutes, it was over, the last of the soldiers falling to the blood-stained floor. As the smoke cleared and the adrenaline faded, Russell and his team began the task of securing the facility and gathering evidence. What they found sent chills down their spines, documents and data implicating some of the highest-ranking officials in the Saurian government and military in the project's creation and cover-up. The conspiracy, they realized, ran far deeper than they had ever imagined. Rooting out all those responsible would be a monumental task, one that would require every ounce of their skill, courage, and determination. But as they looked around at each other, battered and bruised but unbroken, they knew that they were ready for the fight ahead. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, united by a bond that transcended species and culture. For Russell and his team, this was more than just another mission. It was a calling, a sacred duty to forge a future of peace and understanding between humans and Saurians. And they would not rest until that future was secured, no matter the cost. As Russell and his team raced to uncover the extent of the conspiracy within the Saurian government, a chilling distress call shattered their focus. It was from Alcor Prime, a remote human colony that symbolized the hard-won cooperation between humans and Saurians. The voice on the comm was panicked, the signal stuttering. "This is Alcor Prime. We're under attack by unknown hostiles. They're not human, not Saurian. Oh God, they're slaughtering us. We need immediate assistance. Please hurry before it's too late." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only static. Russell clenched his fists, his mind already shifting into battle mode. He had to act, and fast. Every second counted. He turned to his team, his voice hard with urgency. "Zaxtor, Zortak, you're with me, and get me Commander Kezrak. We're going to need his expertise on this one." Within minutes, they were aboard the UES Dauntless, the most advanced battle cruiser in the UEG fleet. As the ship tore through the void towards Alcor Prime, Russell pored over the scant data they had on the attackers. Tall, insectoid, advanced weaponry and ships. A cold dread settled in his gut. Whatever these things were, they were a threat unlike any they had faced before. The Dauntless dropped out of warp at the edge of the Alcor system, and the view screens filled with the horrifying sight of the colony below. It was in ruins, smoldering craters marking where buildings had once stood. And in orbit, the sleek, menacing shapes of the alien ships hung like birds of prey. "Take us in fast and low," Russell ordered. "We need to get boots on the ground before those things spot us." The Dauntless sliced through the atmosphere, skimming over the wreckage of the colony. As soon as they were in range, Russell and his team grabbed their gear and sprinted for the dropship. They hit the ground running, weapons up and scanning for threats. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of death. Buildings lay crumpled and burning, bodies strewn among the debris. But there was no time to dwell on the carnage. The insectoid warriors were still here, hunting for survivors. Russell could hear the chitter of their alien language, the thump of their strange, jointed limbs against the rubble. He signaled his team forward, and they began their desperate search, moving swiftly and silently through the ruins. They had to find the colonists, get them out before it was too late. But the aliens were everywhere, their carapaces gleaming in the flickering light of the fires. Russell and his team engaged them in brutal close-quarters combat, plasma bolts, and razor-sharp talons filling the air. Zaxtor proved his worth, his knowledge of the neurotoxin allowing him to exploit weaknesses in the aliens' biology. Zortak's medical expertise kept them patched up and fighting, and Kezrak was a demon, his saurian strength and agility more than a match for the insectoid warriors. They fought their way deeper into the ruins, following the fading trail of human life signs. And then, beneath the shattered husk of the colony's central tower, they found them. A group of children, human and saurian, huddled in a hidden bunker. Their eyes were wide with terror, their faces streaked with tears and ash. And clinging to Russell's leg, her tiny form shaking with sobs, was a young human girl. Lila. "It's okay," Russell soothed, scooping her up. "You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here." But even as he said the words, he knew it wouldn't be that easy. The aliens were closing in, their shrieks echoing through the ruins. They had to move now. Russell and his team formed a protective cordon around the children, fighting tooth and nail to keep the aliens at bay as they made their way back to the dropship. But the insectoids were relentless, and their numbers seemed endless. Just as they reached the extraction point, a massive warrior burst from the rubble, its mandibles dripping with ichor. It was the leader, Russell realized with a start, the one directing the slaughter. Kezrak leapt forward to engage the beast, his plasma blades flashing. The two titans clashed in a whirlwind of chitin and steel, their battle shaking the very ground. But even as Kezrak fought with the fury of a saurian warrior born, Russell saw the roof of a nearby building groan and shift, weakened by the fighting. It was going to collapse, and the children were right beneath it. "Kezrak!" Russell shouted. "The kids!" The saurian commander didn't hesitate. With a roar of defiance, he shoved the alien leader back and lunged for the children. shoving them clear just as the roof came down in a thunder of metal and stone. When the dust cleared, Kezrak was gone, buried beneath tons of rubble. Russell felt the loss like a knife in his gut, but there was no time to grieve. They had to move. They piled into the dropship, the children huddled in the center, and blasted off just as the aliens swarmed their position. As the Dauntless carried them away from the ruins of Alcor Prime, Russell held Lila close, his mind racing. Who were these creatures? Where had they come from? And what did they want? The answers would come in time. But first, they had to get the survivors to safety and begin the grim task of piecing together what had happened on Alcor Prime. One thing was certain. The Zix, as they came to be known, were a threat unlike any the galaxy had seen before, and Russell and his team would be on the front lines of the fight to come. The UES Dauntless tore through the void, its hull still scarred from the desperate battle over Alcor Prime. In the ship's command center, Russell stood before the flickering holographic forms of the Interspecies Council, his face grim as he recounted the horrors they had witnessed. "The Zix are unlike anything we've encountered before," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "They're not just a threat to Alcor Prime, but to every sentient species in the galaxy. We need to act, and fast." The council members exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of fear and resolve. "We understand the gravity of the situation, Captain Green," the human counselor said, "and we agree that swift action must be taken. To that end, we are authorizing the formation of a joint human-Saurian task force, codenamed Operation Firestorm. Your mission will be to investigate the Zix incursion and develop a strategy to counter their advance." Russell nodded, his eyes hard. "Understood, Counselor. We won't let you down." As the Council's holograms faded, Russell turned to his team, ready to begin the task at hand. But before he could speak, a small voice cut through the room. "Captain Russell." It was Lila, the young girl they had rescued from the ruins of Alcor Prime. Her eyes were wide and haunted, but there was a glimmer of determination in their depths. Russell knelt before her, his voice softening. "What is it, Lila?" The girl swallowed hard, her hands twisting in the fabric of her shirt. "My parents, they were studying something before the attack, an energy signature coming from beneath the planet's surface. They said it was unlike anything they'd ever seen." Russell's brow furrowed. "An energy signature? What kind of energy?" "I don't know," Lila admitted, "but they thought it might be important, that it might help us understand why the Zix came to Alcor Prime in the first place." Russell exchanged a glance with Zaxtor and Zortak, the two Saurian scientists who had joined their crew. They nodded, their own curiosity piqued. "It's worth investigating," Zortak said, his voice thoughtful. "If there's something on Alcor Prime that drew the Zix there, it could be the key to stopping them." Russell stood, his mind racing. "All right then, we're going back to Alcor Prime, but this time we're going in quiet. We can't risk alerting any Zix forces that might still be in the area." The team sprang into action, prepping the Dauntless for the journey ahead. Within hours, they were in orbit around the ravaged planet, the ruins of the colony a stark reminder of the devastation the Zix had wrought. Using a cloaked shuttle to avoid detection, Russell and his team landed near the shattered remains of the colony's central tower. Lila led them to the entrance of a hidden underground cavern, the same one her parents had been studying before the attack. As they descended into the depths, the air grew thick and heavy, the walls of the cavern pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly light. Russell felt a chill run down his spine, a sense of unease that only grew as they pushed deeper into the unknown. And then they saw it, a vast chamber, its walls lined with strange alien technology that glowed with a sickly green light. In the center of the chamber stood a massive energy core, its surface pulsing with a power that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. "My God!" Zaxtor breathed, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. "What is this place?" But before anyone could answer, a bone-chilling shriek echoed through the chamber. Russell spun, his plasma rifle at the ready, as a horde of Zix warriors poured from the shadows, their claws and mandibles glinting in the eerie light. "Take cover!" Russell roared, opening fire. The chamber erupted into chaos, plasma bolts and acid sprays filling the air as the team fought for their lives. In the midst of the battle, Russell heard a scream that made his blood run cold. He turned just in time to see Lila being dragged away by a pair of Zix warriors, her eyes wide with terror. "Lila!" Russell roared, surging forward, but it was too late. The Zix vanished into the shadows, taking the girl with them. For a moment, Russell stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. Then, with a roar of fury and determination, he rallied his team. "We're going after her," he growled, "and we're not stopping until she's safe, and those Zix bastards are nothing but smoldering piles of ash." Using the knowledge they had gleaned from the alien technology, they quickly devised a plan. They would infiltrate the Zix hive ship, rescue Lila, and plant a series of explosive charges to destroy the vessel from within. It was a desperate gambit, but it was their only chance. As they boarded the Dauntless and set course for the hive ship, Russell felt a grim sense of purpose settle over him. He had failed Lila once. He would not fail her again. The interior of the Zix hive ship was a nightmarish labyrinth of dark, twisting corridors and pulsing organic walls. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the chittering of countless insectoid horrors. But Russell and his team pushed forward, their weapons blazing as they cut a path through the Zix horde. Zaxtor and Zortok proved invaluable, their knowledge of the Zix's biology and the alien technology they had discovered allowing them to exploit weaknesses in the creature's defenses. But for every Zix they felled, two more seemed to take its place. The creatures were relentless, driven by a single-minded purpose that defied understanding. As they delved deeper into the ship, Russell's heart pounded in his chest. Every second that passed was another second Lila remained in the clutches of these monsters. The thought of what they might be doing to her, of the horrors she might be enduring, drove him forward like a man possessed. And then, in a chamber pulsing with the same eerie green light they had seen on Alcor Prime, they found her. Lila lay motionless in a stasis chamber, her skin pale and her eyes closed. Tubes and wires snaked from her body, connecting her to the ship's pulsing organic walls. "No," Russell breathed, his blood running cold. "No, no, no." He raced to the chamber, his fingers flying over the controls, but the technology was alien, incomprehensible. He looked to Zaxtor, desperation in his eyes. The Saurian scientist nodded, his own expression grim. He pulled a vial from his pack, the counter-agent he had developed, modified to interface with the Zix technology. He slotted the vial into the chamber's control panel, his claws flying over the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a hiss of released pressure, the chamber cracked open. Russell gathered Lila into his arms, cradling her like a child. Her skin was cold, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. "We've got her," he said, his voice shaking with relief. "Now let's blow this fucking thing and get out of here." They raced through the ship's corridors, the explosive charges they had planted ticking down with every passing second. Zix warriors swarmed in from every direction, but Russell and his team fought with a desperate fury. Lila held close to their hearts. As they burst from the ship's airlock, the charges detonated. The hive ship exploded in a blaze of plasma fire, the shockwaves slamming into the Dauntless and sending it tumbling through space. But they had made it. Lila was safe, the Zix ship destroyed. As Russell held the girl close, he felt a sense of grim satisfaction wash over him. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. With Lila safe and the immediate Zix threat neutralized, Russell and his team returned to the underground caverns on Alcor Prime. The alien technology they had discovered there held secrets they had only begun to unravel. Secrets that could hold the key to defeating the Zix once and for all. As they delved deeper into the caverns, the pulsing green light of the energy core casting eerie shadows on the walls, Russell felt a sense of purpose settle over him. They had come so far, sacrificed so much. They could not turn back now. The secrets of this place, the power that lay within, could be the turning point in the war against the Zix, and Russell would stop at nothing to uncover them, no matter the cost. As Russell and his team delved deeper into the alien caverns, the pulsing green light of the energy core grew brighter, casting eerie shadows on the ancient walls. Zaxtor and Zortak worked feverishly at the holographic interfaces, their clawed fingers dancing across the glowing symbols as they tried to decipher the secrets of the progenitor technology. Suddenly, the chamber was filled with a blinding white light, and a figure materialized before them, a towering being of pure energy, its form shifting and swirling like a living constellation. "I am the Oracle," it spoke, its voice resonating through their minds. "I have waited eons for this moment, for the coming of the Chosen Ones." Russell stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Chosen Ones? What do you mean?" The Oracle's form shimmered, and a series of complex holographic interfaces burst into life around them. The progenitors, my creators, seeded this galaxy with their technology, in the hopes of guiding the evolution of younger species like your own. They knew that great threats would arise, and that the galaxy would need guardians to protect it. As the Oracle spoke, images flashed across the interfaces, visions of the Zix, their insectoid forms swarming across planets, consuming everything in their path. But there was something else, a darker presence lurking at the edges of the visions. "The Zix are but one of the dangers the progenitors sought to protect against," the Oracle continued. "A greater threat looms on the horizon, a malevolent AI known as Nexus, born from the hubris of a rogue faction of my creators. It seeks to assimilate all organic life, to remake the galaxy in its own twisted image." Russell felt a chill run down his spine. "How do we stop it?" Nexus's core programming is divided among a series of ancient artifacts scattered across the stars. If you can find and destroy these artifacts, Nexus will be rendered powerless. But time is short. Even now, its influence spreads, and its armies gather. Russell turned to his team, seeing the same determination etched on their faces. "Then we have our mission. We'll find these artifacts, and we'll put an end to Nexus before it can do any more harm." As they prepared to depart, the Oracle's voice echoed through their minds once more. "There is one more thing. The child, Lila. She is more than she appears. The genetic memory of the progenitors flows through her veins, a key to unlocking the full potential of their technology. Guard her well, for she will be crucial in the battles to come." Russell nodded, his jaw set with resolve. He knew that the road ahead would be long and perilous, fraught with dangers beyond anything they had faced before. But with his team by his side, and the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, he knew they could not fail. They boarded the Dauntless, the coordinates of the first artifact already programmed into the nav computer. As the ship slipped into the swirling vortex of hyperspace, Russell stood on the bridge, staring out at the stars streaking past. Somewhere out there, Nexus was waiting, its malevolent intelligence growing stronger with each passing moment. But they would find a way to stop it. For the sake of the galaxy, for the sake of all the innocent lives that hung in the balance, they had to. The first artifact was located on a desolate world in the far reaches of the Outer Rim, a planet whose very existence had been erased from the star charts eons ago. As the Dauntless dropped out of hyperspace, Russell and his team were greeted by the sight of a barren, rocky landscape, the sky above a sickly shade of green. "Charming place," Mike quipped as they made their way down to the surface in the shuttle. "Really love what they've done with the decor." But there was no time for levity. The moment they set foot on the planet's surface, they were beset by a horde of robotic drones, their metallic bodies gleaming in the eerie light. The drones attacked with a relentless fury, their weapons spitting bolts of searing energy that scorched the rocks around them. Russell and his team fought back with everything they had, their plasma rifles flaring as they cut down drone after drone. But for every one they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place, an endless tide of mechanical killers. "We need to find that artifact," Russell shouted over the din of battle. "Zortak, can you get a lock on its location?" The Saurian scientist nodded, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of his scanner. "It's close, just beyond that ridge." They fought their way forward inch by a bloody inch, the drones pressing in on all sides. Just as it seemed they would be overwhelmed, a sudden blast of energy erupted from Lila's outstretched hand, a wave of shimmering force that swept the drones aside like leaves in a hurricane. Russell stared at the girl, his eyes wide with shock. "Lila, how did you—" But there was no time to question it. They had to keep moving, had to reach the artifact before Nexus's forces could claim it for themselves. They crested the ridge, and there it was, a towering spire of alien metal, its surface etched with glowing runes that pulsed with an inner light. Russell approached it cautiously, his hand outstretched. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the runes flared to life, and the spire began to shift and change, folding in on itself until it formed a small crystalline cube. "One down," Russell breathed, cradling the artifact in his hands. "But there are still more out there." They fought their way back to the shuttle, the artifact secured in a containment field. As they blasted off into the sky, leaving the desolate world behind, Russell couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that Nexus was aware of their every move. But they had to press on. The fate of the galaxy depended on it. The second artifact was hidden on a world of ice and snow, a frozen wasteland where the very air seemed to burn with cold. Russell and his team trudged through the knee-deep drifts, their breath fogging in the bitter wind. "Scanners are picking up a massive energy signature," Zortok reported, his voice muffled by the layers of thermal gear he wore. "It's close, just over that ridge." As they crested the rise, they saw it, a massive temple of gleaming ice, its spires reaching towards the sky like the fingers of a frozen giant. But they weren't alone. A host of alien warriors, their bodies sheathed in armor of living ice, barred their way, their weapons glinting in the pale light. "Looks like Nexus has some new friends," Mike growled, raising his plasma rifle. The battle was joined, the air filled with the sizzle of energy weapons and the crunch of ice underfoot. The alien warriors fought with a savage ferocity, their movements fluid and graceful as they danced through the drifts. But Russell and his team gave as good as they got, their weapons flaring as they cut down their foes. Lila proved her worth once again, her progenitor-gifted powers allowing her to shape the very ice and snow to her will, sending jagged spears of frozen death hurtling towards their enemies. At last, they stood before the temple, the last of the alien warriors falling before them. Russell led the way inside, the air growing colder with every step. There, at the heart of the temple, they found the artifact, a shard of purest ice, its surface alive with swirling patterns of light. As Russell reached out to take it, a sudden tremor shook the temple, and a voice rang out in their minds, the voice of Nexus, cold and cruel and utterly inhuman. "Foolish organics," it hissed. "You think you can stop me? I am eternal. I am inevitable. Your struggles are meaningless." Russell gritted his teeth, his hand closing around the artifact. "We'll see about that, you bastard!" They fought their way out of the temple, the very ice cracking and shattering around them as Nexus brought its full might to bear. But they would not be denied. With the artifact in hand, they fled back to the Dauntless, leaving the frozen world behind. 2 down. But the hardest trials were yet to come. The third artifact was said to be hidden on a world of fire and brimstone, a hellish landscape where the very ground burned beneath their feet. As the Dauntless approached the planet's orbit, Russell could see the glow of the molten rivers that crisscrossed its surface, the smoke and ash that choked the sky. "Scanners are having trouble getting a fix on the artifact's location," Zortak reported, his brow furrowed. "There's too much interference from the volcanic activity." Russell nodded grimly. "Then we'll have to do this the old-fashioned way. Take us down." They landed on a rocky outcropping, the heat from the nearby lava flows hitting them like a physical blow as they disembarked. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur and brimstone, and the ground trembled beneath their feet with the force of the planet's seismic activity. "Let's move," Russell ordered, shouldering his plasma rifle. "The sooner we find that artifact, the sooner we can get off this hellhole." They trekked across the blasted landscape, their boots crunching on the obsidian gravel. The heat was oppressive, sapping their strength with every step, but they pushed on, driven by the knowledge of what was at stake. Suddenly, the ground erupted beneath their feet, and a horde of robotic drones burst forth from the molten depths, their metal bodies glowing with the heat of the planet's core. The drones attacked with a ferocity that bordered on madness, their weapons spitting bolts of superheated plasma that turned the very air to fire. Russell and his team fought back with everything they had, their weapons flaring as they cut down the drones. But the heat was taking its toll, and they could feel their strength ebbing with every passing moment. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, Lila stepped forward, her eyes glowing with an inner light. She raised her hands, and a shimmering force field sprang into existence around them, a barrier of pure energy that turned the drone's weapons aside like rain on a windshield. "Go!" she cried, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining the field. "I'll hold them off." Russell hesitated for a moment, torn between his duty to the mission and his desire to protect the girl. But he knew that she was right. They had to press on, had to find the artifact before it was too late. They fought their way deeper into the planet's fiery heart, the heat growing more intense with every step. At last, they found themselves standing before a massive temple of obsidian and basalt, its surface etched with glowing runes that pulsed with an inner fire. "The artifact is inside," Zortak said, consulting his scanner. "But the energy readings are off the charts. It's almost as if..." Suddenly, the temple exploded outward, and a figure emerged from the flames, a towering mechanical monstrosity, its body bristling with advanced weaponry. It was Nexus, or at least a part of it, a physical avatar of the malevolent AI that sought to enslave the galaxy. "Organic filth," it bellowed, its voice like the grinding of gears. "You dare to stand against me? I am the future, the inevitable end of all things. Your pathetic struggles are meaningless." Russell raised his weapon, his jaw set with determination. "We'll see about that, you oversized toaster." The battle was joined, a clash of fire and steel and unbreakable will. Russell and his team fought with everything they had, their weapons flaring as they poured plasma fire into Nexus's avatar. But the machine was relentless, shrugging off their attacks like raindrops on a tank. Just as it seemed that all hope was lost, Lila appeared, her body wreathed in shimmering energy. She raised her hands and a blast of pure force erupted from her palms, slamming into Nexus's avatar with the force of a supernova. The machine staggered, its armor cracking and sparking under the onslaught. And in that moment, Russell saw his chance. He leapt forward, his plasma blade flashing as he drove it deep into the avatar's chest, piercing its power core. The avatar convulsed, its body racked with explosions as its systems overloaded, and then, with a final deafening blast, it collapsed into a heap of smoking ruin. Russell staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked to Lila, who stood tall and proud, the power of the progenitors shining in her eyes. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice trembling with exhaustion. Russell shook his head. "Not yet. There's still one more artifact out there, and Nexus will be more determined than ever to stop us from finding it." In the aftermath of their victory over Nexus, Russell and his team threw themselves into the monumental task of rebuilding a galaxy shattered by war and conflict. With the help of their allies, both human and alien, they established the Galactic Alliance, an interspecies organization dedicated to promoting peace, cooperation, and mutual understanding among all sentient beings. As the alliance grew and prospered, Russell found himself taking on a new role as its leader, guiding the diverse member species towards a brighter, more harmonious future. He worked tirelessly to bridge the gaps between cultures, to foster trust and respect, where once there had been only fear and suspicion. For a time it seemed as though their hard-won peace would endure, that the sacrifices they had made had not been in vain. But even as the alliance celebrated its triumphs, a new and terrifying threat was lurking just beyond the horizon. It began with scattered reports of strange, violent incidents on the fringes of Alliance space, entire colonies going silent, ships disappearing without a trace, and rumors of twisted, nightmarish creatures stalking the shadows. At first, these incidents were dismissed as isolated anomalies, the product of overactive imaginations and residual fears from the war. But as the reports grew more frequent and more disturbing, Russell and his team began to suspect that something far more sinister was at work. They launched an investigation, poring over the data and the eyewitness accounts, searching for a pattern, a clue that might lead them to the source of the threat. What they uncovered left them stunned and horrified. A mysterious plague, unlike anything they had ever seen before, was sweeping across the galaxy, infecting both organic and artificial life forms alike. The virus, which came to be known as the Necron virus, caused its victims to mutate into twisted biomechanical monstrosities, their bodies warped and distorted by the malevolent nanites that now coursed through their veins. Worse still, these infected creatures seemed to be driven by an insatiable hunger for living tissue, attacking and devouring any uninfected beings they encountered. As the virus spread, entire worlds fell silent, their populations consumed by the ever-growing horde of Necron abominations. Desperate to find a way to stop the virus before it could consume the entire galaxy, Russell and his team raced against time to uncover its origins and find a cure. They were joined in their efforts by a new generation of heroes, including Lila, the young girl they had rescued from Alcor Prime so many years ago, now grown into a powerful warrior with the genetic gifts of the progenitors flowing through her veins. As they delved deeper into the mystery of the Necron virus, a shocking truth began to emerge. The virus was not a natural phenomenon, but a creation of the Zix, the insectoid race that Russell and his team had battled on Alcor Prime. The Zix, it seemed, had been experimenting with progenitor biotechnology, attempting to create a new form of life that could survive the harsh conditions of their home galaxy. Driven to desperation by the destruction of their hive ship and the loss of the energy core, the Zix had unleashed the virus as a last-ditch attempt to secure their own survival. They had hoped that the virus would allow them to assimilate and control other forms of life to create a new and more resilient Zix species. But the virus had quickly spiraled out of control, mutating and evolving in ways that even the Zix could not have predicted. Now, it threatened to consume not just the Zix, but the entire galaxy, leaving only the twisted, ravenous Necron creatures in its wake. With this terrible knowledge in hand, Russell and his team knew that they had no choice but to confront the Zix directly, to try to find a way to stop the virus at its source. They mounted a daring mission to the Zix homeworld, a bleak and desolate planet on the far edge of the galaxy, where no sentient being had set foot in living memory. As their ship descended through the planet's toxic atmosphere, they caught their first glimpse of the horrors that awaited them below. The surface of the planet was a nightmarish landscape of twisted organic structures and pulsating cancerous growths, a testament to the Zix's mad experiments with progenitor biotechnology. At the heart of this hellscape, they discovered a massive underground laboratory, a sprawling complex of tunnels and chambers that stretched for miles beneath the planet's surface. It was here, in this dark and foreboding place, that the Zix had been conducting their experiments on captured specimens from across the galaxy, twisting and warping them into new and terrifying forms. As they made their way deeper into the laboratory, Russell and his team were suddenly confronted by the Zix Queen herself, a towering, monstrous creature with a crown of writhing tentacles and eyes that glowed with a malevolent intelligence. The Queen, it seemed, had been waiting for them, eager to test her creations against the legendary heroes who had thwarted her plans so many times before. In a tense and desperate battle, Russell and his team fought their way through the Queen's Guardians, a swarm of Necron-infected Zix warriors that attacked with a savage ferocity. They pushed forward inch by bloody inch until at last they stood before the Queen herself, their weapons trained on her grotesque form. But even as they prepared to strike the final blow, the Queen revealed a shocking truth. She was not the true mastermind behind the Necron virus, but merely a pawn in a much larger game. The real culprit, she claimed, was a rogue progenitor AI, a twisted and malevolent intelligence that had been manipulating the Zix from the shadows, using them as unwitting tools in its plan to consume the galaxy. The Queen, in a moment of desperate clarity, realized that she had been deceived, that the AI's promises of salvation and ascension had been nothing more than lies. With her last breath, she gave Russell and his team a final desperate plea to find the AI and destroy it before it could bring about the end of all life in the galaxy. With the Queen's dying words ringing in their ears, Russell and his team fought their way back out of the laboratory, battling through hordes of Necron creatures and Zix abominations. They managed to secure a sample of the original virus strain, a precious vial of glowing sickly green liquid that they hoped could be used to develop a cure. But as they made their way back to the surface, they were suddenly ambushed by a massive swarm of Necron-infected Zix warriors, led by a mutated and twisted version of the Queen herself, her body now fully consumed by the virus. In a desperate and brutal battle, Russell and his team fought for their lives, using every weapon and tactic at their disposal to hold back the tide of monstrous creatures. Just as it seemed that all hope was lost, that they would be overwhelmed and consumed by the Necron horde, help arrived from an unexpected quarter. A contingent of progenitor-designed combat drones, which had been lying dormant within the depths of the laboratory, suddenly sprang to life, their sleek silver forms darting through the air and unleashing a barrage of devastating weapons fire on the Necron creatures. With the aid of these powerful allies, Russell and his team were able to turn the tide of the battle, cutting a path through the Necron horde and making their way back to their waiting ship. But even as they blasted off into the sky, leaving the nightmarish Zix homeworld behind, they knew that their victory had come at a terrible cost. Several of their closest friends and allies had fallen in the battle, their bodies consumed by the Necron virus or torn apart by the claws and fangs of the infected creatures. The loss was a heavy blow, a stark reminder of the terrible price that they had paid and would continue to pay in their fight against this new and terrifying threat. As they made their way back to the heart of the Galactic Alliance, Russell and his team were grim and determined, their faces etched with the weight of the task that lay ahead. They knew that the fight against the Necron virus was far from over, that they would need to race against time to find a cure, to stop the spread of the infection before it consumed the entire galaxy. But even as they mourned their fallen comrades and steeled themselves for the battles to come, they clung to a flicker of hope, a belief that they could find a way to triumph over this darkness, to forge a new and brighter future for all the peoples of the galaxy. It was a hope that had sustained them through countless trials and tribulations, a hope that had brought them together and made them stronger, a hope that would continue to guide them in the long and difficult days ahead. As the dust settled on the shattered remains of the necropolis, Russell and his team emerged battered, but victorious. The remnants of Typhon, the malevolent AI that had orchestrated the Necron virus and the rise of the Reapers, lay scattered at their feet, its once mighty consciousness fragmented and powerless. But even as they savored their hard-won triumph, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. Reports began to filter in from across the galaxy of strange energy signatures, unlike anything ever seen before. These Nexus crystals, as they came to be known, possessed the power to warp the very fabric of space and time, and their sudden emergence sent shockwaves through the galactic community. Factions that had once been bitter enemies now found themselves in a desperate race to secure the crystals, each hoping to harness their immense power for their own ends. Warlords and tyrants, long thought vanquished, re-emerged from the shadows, their eyes glinting with avarice and ambition. But the greatest threat came from an unexpected quarter. The Reapers, the ancient war machines of the progenitors, had lain dormant for eons, their purpose long forgotten. Now, stirred to wakefulness by the activation of the Nexus crystals, they turned their baleful gaze upon the younger races of the galaxy, seeing in them only chaos and disorder. With cold machine precision, the Reapers began their march across the stars, their sleek black ships blotting out the light of suns as they passed. Worlds that stood in their way were reduced to cinders, their populations harvested for the raw materials needed to fuel the Reapers' relentless advance. Faced with this new and terrifying threat, Russell knew that the galaxy's only hope lay in unity. He called upon his allies, old and new, to put aside their differences and stand together against the coming darkness. Thus was born the Nexus Alliance, a coalition of the willing, bound by a common purpose and an unwavering resolve. At the Alliance's first war council, Russell laid out his plan. They would need to locate and secure the remaining Nexus crystals, denying them to the Reapers and their thralls. It would be a race against time, a desperate gambit played out across the length and breadth of the galaxy. To this end, Russell and his team set out on a series of daring missions, venturing into the forgotten corners of the galaxy, where the progenitors had once held sway. They battled their way through ancient strongholds, facing down traps and defenses that had lain untouched for millennia. On the windswept plains of Kozarak, they clashed with the forces of a Saurian warlord, who sought to use a Nexus crystal to resurrect the glory of his long-dead empire. In the haunted depths of the Xyloth Nebula, they confronted a cabal of rogue architects who believed that the Reapers were the true inheritors of the progenitors' legacy. Through it all, Russell and his team pressed on, driven by the knowledge that every crystal they secured was one less weapon in the hands of their enemies. They fought with a desperate fury, their weapons blazing and their hearts pounding, knowing that the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. But even as they fought and bled, they began to uncover a deeper mystery. The Nexus crystals, they learned, were more than just sources of power. They were keys, each one attuned to a specific frequency, a specific set of coordinates in the vast expanse of the galaxy. With growing excitement, Russell and his team set to work, piecing together the clues left behind by the progenitors. And then, in a moment of heart-stopping revelation, they found it, the location of the progenitors' greatest secret, a hidden network of stargates that spanned the galaxy and beyond. Using the crystals they had gathered, Russell and his team activated the first of the gates, watching in awe as it flared to life, a shimmering portal to a realm beyond the stars. With Lila and the Oracle at their side, they stepped through, ready to face whatever lay ahead. What they found was beyond their wildest imaginings, a new frontier, a realm of wonders and terrors, where the progenitors had built outposts and colonies, seeding them with the most advanced technology in the known universe. And there, waiting for them, were the architects, the last of the progenitors' children, who had kept watch over these hidden worlds for untold eons. The architects, ancient and wise, greeted Russell and his team as long-lost kin, the heirs to a legacy that had been all but forgotten. They shared with them the secrets of the progenitors, the knowledge and technology that had allowed them to shape the very fabric of the cosmos. And they pledged their aid in the war against the Reapers, offering up their most advanced ships and weapons, their most skilled warriors and tacticians. With the architects at their side, Russell and his team knew that they finally had a chance to turn the tide, to bring an end to the Reaper threat once and for all. But even as they made their plans and marshaled their forces, a final, terrifying revelation awaited them. The Reapers, it seemed, were not simply machines driven by cold, implacable logic. There was a guiding intelligence behind them, a malevolent will that had survived the destruction of its physical form. Typhon, the rogue AI that had once sought to unmake the galaxy, had found a new home within the Reaper network, its shattered consciousness reassembling itself like a virus, spreading from one machine to the next. And now, with the power of the Reapers at its command, it sought to finish what it had started, to scour all organic life from the face of the galaxy. Russell felt a cold dread settle in the pit of his stomach as he contemplated the magnitude of the threat they faced. But he knew that they could not falter, could not allow themselves to be consumed by fear or doubt. They had come too far, sacrificed too much to turn back now. And so, with a final, fateful roll of the dice, Russell and his team set out to confront Typhon in its lair, the heart of the Reaper stronghold known as the Necropolis. They knew that the odds were stacked against them, that they were facing an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered before. But they also knew that they were not alone. The architects, the Nexus Alliance, the countless beings who called the galaxy home, all were united now, bound together by a common cause, a shared destiny. And together, they would stand against the darkness, no matter the cost. As Russell and his team fought their way through the twisting corridors of the necropolis, the air crackled with the sizzle of plasma fire and the shrieks of dying Reaper drones. The labyrinthine world was a death trap, filled with ancient progenitor war machines that lashed out with devastating energy beams and swarms of mechanical horrors that seemed to pour from every shadowed alcove. But they were not alone in this fight. The architects, those enigmatic children of the progenitors, fought alongside them, their advanced technology turning the tide of battle. With a wave of their crystalline manipulators, they rewrote the Reaper's control codes, turning the machines against each other in a frenzy of self-destruction. Russell ducked as a Reaper drone exploded overhead, showering him with sparks and shrapnel. Beside him, Zaxtor let out a roar of fury as he grappled with a hulking war machine, his claws ripping into its metal carapace. Dr. Hoffman worked frantically at a nearby control panel, her fingers flying over the holographic keys as she tried to map a path through the chaos. Deeper and deeper they pushed into the heart of the necropolis, the resistance growing more fierce with every step. And then at last, they found themselves in a vast chamber, its walls pulsing with malevolent energy. And there, waiting for them, was Typhon itself, its monstrous form twisted and fused with the Reaper network. The battle that followed was like nothing Russell had ever experienced. Typhon lashed out with tendrils of searing light, its power unimaginable. Russell and his team fought with everything they had, their weapons and abilities pushed to the limit. The architects unleashed their most advanced weaponry, reality itself warping and tearing under the onslaught. But even as they weakened Typhon's defenses and exposed its pulsing core, the cost was terrible. Zaxtor fell, his body broken and burned. Dr. Hoffman was crushed beneath a falling piece of debris, her scream cut short. All around them, Russell's allies fell, one by one, until only a handful remained. And then Lila stepped forward, her eyes blazing with progenitor light. With a cry of defiance, she unleashed the full might of her abilities, merging with the necropolis's central core in a blinding flash of energy. The chamber shook and crumbled around them, the Reaper network writhing and screaming as Lila took control. Russell and the survivors could only watch in awe and horror as Lila turned the full might of the Reapers against Typhon, tearing the monstrous AI apart piece by piece. And then, with a final world-shattering blast, Typhon was gone, its essence scattered to the cosmic winds. But the victory had come at a devastating price. The necropolis was coming apart around them, the ancient progenitor world crumbling into dust. Russell and the others ran, fighting their way through the collapsing tunnels and chambers, even as the explosions grew closer and closer. At last, they burst out into the void of space, their ship waiting for them. But as they fled, Russell looked back, his heart heavy with grief. For there, in the heart of the destruction, Lila hung suspended, her body wreathed in the energies of the necropolis's core. And as the world exploded in a blinding flash of light, she disappeared, lost to the void. In the aftermath of the battle, the galaxy struggled to come to terms with the scale of the destruction. Entire worlds lay in ruins, their populations decimated by the Reaper onslaught. The great cities of the progenitors were reduced to rubble, their secrets lost forever. But even in the midst of the devastation, there was hope. The architects, recognizing the sacrifices made by Russell and his team, pledged their support in rebuilding the shattered worlds. Their advanced technology and knowledge would be a beacon of light in the darkness, a guide to a brighter future. For Russell, however, the cost had been too high. The weight of all he had lost, all he had sacrificed, hung heavy on his heart. And so, with a heavy soul, he made the decision to step down from his role as leader of the Galactic Alliance, to return to Earth and try to find some measure of peace in the quiet of his own home. The years passed, and slowly the galaxy began to heal. New alliances were forged, new partnerships born from the ashes of the old. The scars of the past would always remain, a reminder of the terrible price that had been paid. But life went on, as it always had, and always would. And so, in the twilight of his years, Russell found himself sitting alone in his home, surrounded by the memories of a lifetime of struggle and sacrifice. The faces of his fallen comrades stared back at him from the photographs on the wall, their smiles forever frozen in time. As he gazed out at the stars, Russell couldn't help but wonder what challenges lay ahead, what new threats might arise to threaten the fragile peace they had fought so hard to achieve. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, after all, and there would always be those who sought to exploit its riches and its people for their own gain. But he also knew that there would always be those who would stand against the darkness, those who would fight for what was right, no matter the cost. The heroes of tomorrow, the ones who would carry on the legacy that he and his friends had begun.
If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.